Andy, I haven't spoken to you yet about the succession and the coaching ticket yet. So we know who the next head coach is going to be. We don't know what his backroom team is going to be. Greg Feek is obviously moving on, I think, to Japan after the World Cup. How important is it that we have somebody who is his natural successor on the coaching ticket, or is it important at all?
No, I think we need to be realists about it. I think when Joe, I've heard concerns that Farrell hasn't been a head coach. Joe Schmidt was an assistant coach for 7 years to Vern Cotter in Claremont before he got given the Leinster job. So somebody took a chance and a leap of faith on Joe being a head coach. And I think he lost his first 4 professional games as a head coach for Leinster. And visionaries like George Hook were calling for his head, and he was
like the worst coach ever.
He was one of the worst appointments of all time. So it goes to show what a bit of patience does. I suppose in that regard, Farrell is a different personality to Joe. He's a different character. He seems to be more emotional. He's got a physical presence about him, and he impresses that upon the group. As a defensive coach and his own background in sport at a high level. So there's lots of differentiating factors between him and Joe as a person. So I think he needs to be given and afforded time to be his own person. It's the same will happen when O'Gara retired and Sexton came in. He's different. When Sexton retires and maybe Carberry takes over, he's different, and he needs to be given time to bed in and express his own strengths and skills, and one size doesn't fit all, and there's only one Joe Schmidt. When Farrell takes over, he's a different animal altogether, and hopefully we can be patient with that and give him the respect he deserves to start off, and a bit of time.
Who should be in the backroom team? He's pushing hard for Raj.
If I mention his name anymore, I'm going to have to get a cut out of the contract if he gets it. Take some commission. But
what do you think of that?
I think it's a really good idea.
Stuart Lancaster is the other one. But
I think where Raj, the difference obviously with Raj, he's down in New Zealand. He's been in France, and most likely he would love that job. I think Lancaster has been an England head coach. I don't know would he like to be an assistant at an international level.
It's hard to know.
And I don't know if Leinster Leinster may be extremely reluctant to let him go, whereas Canterbury would probably give Ronan.
Well, Roger's finished in next August anyway. As it stands, he's there for another year. But I think the interesting one is Leinster won't want to lose Stuart Lancaster. But he's been linked with so many jobs. Leinster play Bath away on Saturday in the Heineken Cup, and Bath are strongly trying to get Stuart Lancaster, and he's commuting over and back. Would it suit him better? We'd be speculating on what's going on, what he's thinking himself. I think he loves it in Leinster.
Yeah,
he loves the culture there. Why wouldn't you want to stay with a team like Leinster? I wouldn't say he will go to another club. I'd say if he's going anywhere, he'll either, he'll go to international rugby somewhere, and I think he'll be very much in demand. But he has to be mindful of Leinster have reinvigorated him and reignited his career with the success that they've had in the last couple of years.
I think he is. I think he's a very astute guy, and he got dragged through the mud in public by his own country, and as they only can do over there. They were destructive and they were just completely and entirely unfair towards them. For a guy who'd masterminded a hammering of the All Blacks a year before their World Cup, he got one or two things potentially wrong, but the team didn't perform, and he was dragged through the mud. And I think he did speak about taking the Leinster job. He had an interview with Joe Malloy on News Talk, and he spoke to Wayne Bennett, who's a legendary rugby league coach, and Wayne Bennett's advice to Lancaster was, whatever your next job is, make sure you 100% want the job and they 100% want you, and unless that's a good fit, he goes, don't take it, because your career will get destroyed, because you're already coming from a pretty dark place.
So and England made a mistake. You look at Graham Henry in the 2007 World Cup when New Zealand were beaten by France. There was calls for his head, and a lot of the public in New Zealand wanted him out because that was seen as massive failure, losing that game. And then they
choked again.
They reinstated him, and they won in 2011, and
Do Farrell and Lancaster have any relationship then?
They do. I'm sure they get on.
Farrell was Lancaster's assistant when Lancaster was head coach for England at the last World Cup. So they would work. They've worked with each other. They know each other well. But as far as
roles reversed, if it happens, like.
But that would be an interesting dynamic then for him. Could I go in there as a second,
Well, one of his things in Leinster is he seems very much without ego. For a guy who coached England as a head coach, he was being brought in as Leo Cullen, as the final say, and he's being his assistant, and he said no issue with that, and he's never made a power play for the top job, and he's got on with his work and done it brilliantly. And insofar as being linked with Bath, I think he would be crazy. And Bath rugby is, I heard recently described as Downton Abbey. They're locked away in this country house, literally away from the city in Bath, a huge kind of palatial country home where they train, and they've got pitches, and they're plagued by infighting. They're not a club anywhere near Leinster in terms of their academy setups, their consistency, their recent success.
One job that might be of interest, which isn't available at the moment, but which could be available in the next couple of weeks, is the Australia job for the World Cup. It might be a terrible job. It might also be an amazing job for a year to do.
International rugby is where most 99% of coaches want to be, I think, particularly if you've had a taste of it. I remember having a chat with Clive Woodward. It was something along the lines of, we were talking about speculation, different coaches one year, and he said, if you have that ambition, international rugby is where you have to go if you want to get to the top. And I think I would be very surprised if Stuart Lancaster didn't want to coach internationally again. It's different than the club scene. He's had less pressure coaching in Leinster now because he's not running the whole environment like Leo Cullen's the head man, and he's out in the field coaching, running the sessions, and he's probably enjoying that. But any job internationally in the top nations that comes up would interest any coaches, I think. Including O'Gara, I think any of them who are out there, they would want to try and have a crack at international coaching.
You mentioned them again there. You're definitely getting a cut of the contract.
Well, can you name anybody else?
No, it's fair. No, I'd agree.
Genuinely, I'm saying, because I said this to you the other day, Ger.
I don't know
who else is in the running to be Andy Farrell's assistant, unless he pulls someone out of English rugby.
But what does Mike Prendergast do? What's his job?
Well, Mike Prendergast, he's with Stade Francais, and he's doing really well, and he's probably someone that, could he go into that job straight away? From a skills point of view, what would count against him is probably the status and his playing career.
Yeah,
he hasn't played for Ireland.
That shouldn't count.
But
really,
his attack with Oyonnax last year was getting unbelievable compliments in France. He was struggling with a very small budget in France, but they were scoring 30, 35 points every game against all the top teams. And he's with Stade Francais now, and Paul and Heineke Meyer. So Mike has been in France for a number of years. Unfortunately for him, I don't think he would. He's not getting mentioned because he's not high profile enough.
But I'm sure they are. If you were doing, and I'm sure
but I think
Andy Farrell
for Mike
is doing
to come back, and I think it'd be brilliant to see him come back in a few years, because he's doing an incredible job, and the experience he's getting in France is to go with a Munster, a Leinster, a Connacht, or an Ulster, and actually be a backs coach or a skills coach or get some sort of a role there. He probably has to go a roundabout way to get to the top level international, and which is unfair sometimes. It's all down to perception. But I think what he's done in France certainly shouldn't go unnoticed. And I think he's very, very well thought of over in France there for what he did with that. Not just with an Oyonnax, but with Grenoble as well. And you know yourself, Andy, if the French rugby is the budgets that some of the top ones have, it's very hard to compete with that. And it's kind of like the Premiership in England. There's two tables and one table, if you like.
Yeah, it's hard for Ireland to develop new coaches when we only have the 4 provinces here. So you've got to send people out around the world and hope that
Gervin Dempsey's gone to Bath as well. So it'll be interesting to see how Gervin gets on there for the next couple of years. There's a lot of other good coaches abroad as well.
A quick last one on this. Any thoughts on Neil Madigan's performance on the weekend? Can he have a future with Ireland? Asks Alan McGee. Pat Lamb's Bristol hammered Leicester. Obviously, Jordan Murphy not getting linked with any of these jobs either at the moment, is the head coach at Leicester. Madigan is off the table from an Ireland perspective when he's playing in England, irrespective of how well he plays, or is there a point where he gets to the peak of his career, has an 18-month window where he's the outstanding out half playing in English rugby? Does everybody change their mind at that point?
Unless they have a policy shift I don't see him getting back in, or unless he moves back to Ireland. I could see him actually moving back to Ireland very conceivably. I think I actually saw quite a bit of his performance. I thought he was outstanding, and he was outstanding for a season or two before he left as well. So he's ultimately in the Simon Zebo bracket now. He's made a choice. They only have ever made allowances for one player, really, for Sexton when he went to Rossing, and they went on record to say that Joe said he was happy to make an allowance for one person, but I don't anticipate he's going to do it for anybody else.